Hi, my name is Brittany Lovejoy, and you're looking at a picture of my 4 dyslexic children. So what is dyslexia? Basically, it's smart people who have a hard time learning to read, write, and at times speech is affected. These children are typically, or people are typically have an average to above average IQ, and some symptoms are that they are slow at reading, they can be frustrated when they're reading, they're really poor at spelling, and they have great difficulty sounding out words, especially unfamiliar words. This is a great 5-minute video. This is going to be saved and uploaded, so you can take your time and come back to write it down. But it's a 5-minute video describing dyslexia if you'd like to look at that later or show family members. I'm going to start with my youngest. I knew that my son was dyslexic before he was diagnosed based on all of the research I had done for my older children. We have a strong family history. And what I noticed with my son is he could not rhyme. He finally can, and he's now 6, but he had a really hard time learning to rhyme or even understanding what a rhyme was. His speech is actually pretty severe still. He speaks like a 2-year-old, and he's 6. His speech is, he's in kind of a severe case with the speech, but my twins were not in preschool. Their speech was hard to understand, but not as severe as his. He had difficulty learning and remembering the names of his classmates. He had a hard time with the 2 letters in his names. His name is JP, and he could not get them right for a good 1.5 years. Another thing that he did was he would talk a lot about the thing over there with that thing on the thing, and basically he was speaking my language, so I totally understood what he was talking about. When my son was diagnosed, he was diagnosed at the age of 5.5, and I was surprised, but not as surprised as my school district. They said that we have to wait and see if this is full-blown dyslexia. Anyway, I ended up moving from the school district, but basically they were telling me that we need to wait and see him fail, and so I have this quote here: "While we continue to argue about the existence of dyslexia, another child becomes learning disabled." I knew, based on all the research I had done, that it was vital for him to get a really good early start, so I spent about 6 months with him, and I had some training, and I taught him his letters and their sounds and the symbol for their letters. So when he started kindergarten, he knew most of his letters, their symbols, and all of their sounds. So one of the biggest myths around dyslexia is that they can't be good readers, but I believe with a really good start, they can be. These are some symptoms in 1st grade. Waiting to see if your child will grow out of it may only create more struggles later. At this point, my son is ranking in the middle of his kindergarten class. So he's even above a few children who are not dyslexic because he had some really good intervention. And on here on the bottom quote, of children who display reading problems in 1st grade, 74% will still be poor readers in 9th without the proper interventions. And I wasn't going to have that happen with my own son because it happened to my twins. And if I had known then what I know now, I wonder if I could have helped my twins not feel like failures and not feel bad about themselves. I don't know. So that brings me to these lasting consequences. My twins they had reports with the Storm Center, and it showed that they had like symptoms of dyslexia, but they weren't diagnosed as dyslexic. but the school kind of marginalized that, and they didn't take it seriously. And 6 months later, when finally all the IEP paperwork came and they started trying to learn, they ended up being emotionally, their self-esteem really suffered, and it was really hard for them to learn at that point. A teacher educated about dyslexia can be the one person who saves a child and his or her family from years of frustration and anxiety. And I absolutely believe in that. You know, when even now, Rita still, you know, she's really insecure with herself as a reader, and she wasn't joking when she said, you know, Mom, if they make me read out loud, I won't go to school. She totally meant every word of that. She felt really bad about herself. She's feeling better, but it's taking a long time. It took almost a year to see her full personality return. In my experience, I do want to talk a little bit about reading books with the children and how I read to my children all the time, and my kids were not any better at reading from me reading to them. So perhaps it increased their vocabulary and knowledge and later their comprehension, yet it didn't prepare these moderate to severely dyslexic people to read. My third grader is still reading at the less than first percentile, and you know, I wonder where would she be if I hadn't read to her. So lazy. In first grade, Rita's anxiety became so high that she turned to freeze mode. At that time, I didn't understand all of this verbiage, and you know, a well-meaning educator said I didn't think Rita wanted to learn. Well, she had totally shut down. But here's what happens. There's a stress hormone called cortisol, and during the time when cortisol is expressed, it's very difficult for a child to learn when they're stressed. So that part of the brain is actually disconnected. So we really want to do everything we can to reduce the stress for these children. First, to calm the nervous system so that they can learn. If it's the environment they're learning in or the curriculum that is causing the stress, or there are people causing the stress, then as in possibly other students, like calling them names, and you know, that's lasting also, then the child isn't going to learn. I wanted to speak about lazy because I hear this a lot, and ask yourself, as a parent who has seen this and have heard a lot of parents talking about their children maybe being lazy, just ask yourself, who doesn't want to learn? You know, my kids, every time the Cool Kids song comes on, they always say, this is a great song for dyslexia. You know, be like the cool kids, because all the cool kids, they really fit in, and they want to fit in. They want to be like the other kids. They want to feel successful. So I want to just say your child is not lazy, or this child, even to the educators who are listening, this child is not lazy, and every child wants to learn to read and learn to read well. Rita in first grade was able to say, I don't think like the other kids. My brain doesn't work well in school. So one of my favorite quotes by Dr. Shaywitz is that dyslexia is like an island of weakness surrounded by a sea of strengths. But that weakness is what basically follows them throughout their school years. In school, it's the reading and writing, spelling, and some of the strengths in dyslexia. I'm sure you can basically, you might have been reading this, noticeably excellent when focused on highly specialized areas such as medicine, law, public policy, finance, architecture, or basic science. I do want to say something about that basic science quote, because over half of NASA people are dyslexic, so I would think that should say science, but I'm quoting this from the book. They're excellent in writing if content and spelling are not important. They're extremely empathetic, and I definitely notice that in my children, and warmth, and they have feelings for others. They're big picture thinkers, and they think outside of the box, and sometimes they really think outside of the box, so we have to take a few seconds to figure out what they're really thinking and where they're coming from, but if you take a minute and digest it, sometimes it's an absolute brilliant idea, and I think sometimes it even goes over the adults' heads, like, what is this processing? But to continue on, my oldest daughter, Madeline, she made the honor roll 3 times last year. So it's not a matter of intelligence, but it kind of leads me to this next slide. So my oldest, Madeline, she had so much knowledge about things that she was easily able to make it up until like the end of 3rd grade. So she had a social studies test in 4th grade, and she scored a 70 on it. She was really devastated about that grade because she's a high achiever. She wants to be a high achiever, and she is. And she brought it home, and she asked us to read her the lesson the next time, the entire booklet of, I don't know, it was 10 pages, so that she could get a better grade. So I spoke with her wonderful teacher, and I asked him, can you send me home the notes in the classroom so that we could read to her? And he did. He sent it home for her, and then she continued getting her good grades to do well on the test. But it ended up being that her knowledge skills of, her world skills of that stuff, she didn't know, so she needed more information. I wanted to speak here that a dyslexic sometimes takes longer to complete their homework assignments, so and it can be really frustrating for them. And I just want to speak about a piece where my children had, in 1st grade, they would bring home books, and they were really frustrated about them. They would end up crying and become really tense, and I ended up just reading the books to them because I absolutely hated seeing them feel that way, and it was just, it was really unhealthy. So I read them the books, but it is possible to find books that they can read with a 95% accuracy. And a rule of thumb is if they make less than 5 errors on a page, then that book is right for them. But if they're continually making errors, I'd go back to the school and ask them to give them books that they can read with better accuracy so that they can feel successful as themselves. Okay, multisensory and accommodations. So this is typically in the earlier years when you're teaching them how to read with letters and their numbers. Multisensory is using your different senses, so your visual, your sight, your hearing, your movement, and your touching things. And so with my son, when he was learning the letter A, he would see A, apple, A. So the sight would be that visual, the apple, and the A he would write with his 2 fingers on a board or on a piece of paper, but he would be touching things, and we would make it really fun. Another accommodation for the kids would be I definitely let them listen to audiobooks because getting through a lot of these books was difficult for them, and I didn't want them not to have the same experience as the other kids. So we read or listened to a ton of Magic Treehouse books on our way back and forth from speech lessons and Stern Center and different things that we were doing. And this is a great site here, pages 7 to 11, that talks about accommodations in this multisensory approach. One of the hardest things for me as a parent, and I'm hearing other parents also, is to interpret test scores and data. You're not alone if you're confused. I'm still confused. It's really important to ask for some measurable goals on your IEP. There's a great little IEP and webinar on the bottom of this page. My oldest regressed in public school even though she was on the honor roll. So it's really important to have some type of a measurable goals that you can check out. We're going to be working on a flyer here. So we can't wait. So the question I ask is, when should you ask for a comprehensive evaluation? I feel like you should ask, or all parents should ask, when you feel something is not right. We need to trust our instincts. The school cannot diagnose for dyslexia, but after you go through about 3 months of the comprehensive evaluation process, and your child may have an SLD, or your child is struggling in reading and writing. Maybe they had speech issues, you had a family history of dyslexia, or horrible spelling, and they need more support in school. You can ask for a publicly funded private evaluation at public expense. You can get this diagnosis for your children, and I feel like it's really important, especially at the college level and in the school level, for you to understand how your child learns so you can help them more, and you can be a better advocate. So the effect of academic failure in childhood and adolescence can be pervasive and lifelong, and it's absolutely true. I still see some of this with Rita. And the next quote was, "Lift the barrier of ignorance surrounding dyslexia and replace it with the wonderful comfort of knowledge." And I feel like it is a little bit comfortable to understand this, but it's also stressful because it's a lot of information, and it's a lot of pressure to advocate for my, I don't know, I felt like it was a lot of pressure to advocate for my children. So after reading these quotes and understanding the pressure and failure that these people went through, I knew that I couldn't keep quiet any longer. Reading failure is the most commonly shared characteristic of juvenile justice offenders. And when I saw my daughter Rita totally close up and no longer be the Rita that I knew and be a person that I could barely have a conversation with, I knew that that could be her. Or 75% of America's state prison inmates are high school dropouts. So what would have happened to Rita if I had just continued pushing her? There was almost nothing left. Again, unquote this quote from Cynthia Coletti. The emotional aspect is devastating for families, and including parents. It was really hard for me. I guess with all the research that I've been doing, I've learned that children who fail at school can fail in society as well. So we're on a mission, and failure is not an option, and we're hoping to gather new members for our movement. And parents who are listening, I wish you the best, and teachers, thank you for the wonderful jobs you've been doing with our children. I know that you only have a certain amount of time with our children and limited resources, and that resource is time and training. And I just want to say I understand that, you're not creating failures in our system. Our system needs more. So please join us, teachers and parents. Okay, thank you.
Hi, I am Brittany's partner, and I'm not sure if the title was used, but we hoped that what we could reflect was two perspectives, the perspective of a parent and the perspective of a quotes professional, meaning that I come more from the teacher side than the parent side, although I certainly have children in my extended family who have struggled with reading. I'm going to start with the idea that a theme that I want to try to maintain throughout this talk is the idea of being on the same page, meaning how do we get both teachers and parents to be on the same page such that each has a good understanding of what the other knows and believes and does relative to teaching children to read. Okay, so here's a little bit about my professional background and might show you the reason that I'm taking the teacher perspective. For one important thing, I am the mother of 2 daughters, and so I have watched them grow as teachers, and I understand how much time and effort and energy and commitment they put into being great teachers. And of course, I believe they are great teachers. I'm also the grandmother of 6 learners, and I've watched those learners develop, starting with language skills and then reading skills. So I feel as though I have a pretty broad perspective on, if you will, sort of a family orientation. I've been a teacher of children and a teacher of both pre-service and practicing teachers. And I've just listed a few of the courses that I've taught, and I'm just going to comment on 2 things that are on that list. One is practicum supervision. In the training programs that I've been involved in, the practicum piece has always been the most important piece. It really doesn't matter what you learn if you can't apply it. So part of our programs have always been to make sure that our teachers had an opportunity to practice, but to practice with supervision so that they got some feedback about translating ideas that they get in a course into working with kids. One of the courses that I taught in my whole career at St. Mike's was something, I don't remember the exact title, but it was something like children with special needs in the regular classroom. And in both of those situations, our students went to schools to work with real kids, having written specific lesson plans to address the needs of those particular children. And I think that's a wonderful experience, but I also note that that was the course that our students had on working with children with special needs. Yes? No? Click? Just click up there. Oh, click off of the screen. Anywhere on here. Okay, there you go. So I am going to start with that theme of being on the same page with the idea of open communication. How can we as adults work in the best interest of children? And I think we do that when we can be open about our knowledge, our beliefs, and our actions about how children learn to read. To me, that means feeling free to share those knowledge and beliefs and actions through your own personal story, whether your story is the story of a parent or a teacher. Being open to the other's viewpoints, which is not always easy. Negotiating, when negotiating is possible, to try to arrive at a place where both teacher and parent feel like they are doing the best they can for the child. And then these last 2 items I think are so critical to whether or not we do get on the same page that I wanted to highlight them. One is being willing to monitor progress and share data. As Brittany has pointed out, we have kids who demonstrate some signs of being in trouble relative to learning to read in preschool. And if we don't start paying attention to that difficulty until they're in 3rd grade, it is just way, way too late. So we really need to take on an attitude of constant progress monitoring. And it only makes a difference when you're monitoring if you then translate that into what you're going to do with the data that you get. So making changes when children are not succeeding at the optimal level is the second part of that. I don't know why I'm having trouble finding this place. Okay. So here's what I think we as partners, parent and professional partners need to do and to pay attention to. First of all, I want to extend this collaboration to the child, because I think children give us all kinds of signals when they're not feeling okay about what they're learning. So I see the collaboration as being three-way, if you will. And here are the four areas where I think we can work together. Early identification, and more specifically, from preschool up to second grade and beyond. But I think the most critical part is preschool to second grade. Instruction. What teachers know, believe, and do about reading instruction, the frameworks, the ideas, and the terminology that they use. And in a complementary fashion, how parents see reading instruction. Do parents understand the approach that the teacher is taking to reading? Does the teacher understand what the parent views as the optimal approach to teaching reading for children who are struggling? Third area, and again, I just don't see how we can get where we need to be without monitoring. We need to know if kids are making progress. We can't wait until second grade, third grade and say, oops, not meeting the standard. And so I'm going to keep coming back to that. And then the fourth essential is children as learning partners. I believe that children are very tuned in to their own learning as early as preschool, that they send us signals, sometimes verbal signals, I hate this, I don't want to do this, I can't do this, sometimes nonverbal signals. The way they react when they, quotes, make a mistake, their reluctance to try new things, not wanting to do things with anybody else watching, signs that they're confused, signs that they need help by the pace at which they do things. So four things. If we can focus on these four things, I'm convinced that we can make, and focus on them together, I'm convinced we can make progress. And the first of those things is early identification. There is a phenomenal research base out there that tells us that we can begin to make observations about a child's success at reading as early as preschool. And I would go all the way back as early as infancy, because you can't become a reader if you haven't developed your oral language skills. By kindergarten, we can have a tentative identification. And Brittany and I have gone around a few times about my use of that word. By tentative, I mean that we may not have had any formal testing that places a child in a category, but we have been able to accumulate data by constant progress monitoring such that we have a pretty good sense that this child at whatever age, preschool, kindergarten, first grade, is not making progress at a rate that will result in becoming a successful reader. And then finally, waiting until a child fails is unacceptable and has significant consequences. I can't tell you how many things I see online about holding back third graders and how frustrating that is to think, why are we waiting until third grade to decide that kids aren't going to be successful readers? Because by that time, depending upon your starting point, they've already wasted 4, 6, 8 years. And one of the quotes that I like to use is a quote from Louisa Moats, who is, in my opinion, one of the real experts on dyslexia. Since 1996, state and federal reading initiatives have focused on the problem of reading failure at the kindergarten and the primary grades. To complicate matters, the older student has not practiced reading and avoids reading because reading is taxing, slow, and frustrating. Nobody wants to do something they're not good at. So they have little reading experience, and because they have not read much, they are not familiar with the vocabulary, sentence structure, text organization, and concepts of academic book language. So it isn't just that the kids are making slow progress, it's that they're missing out on other reading skills that they need to be developing. And I'm going to come back to that idea later. So in preschool, what should we be looking at if we're hopeful of both early identification and instruction? We should begin to think about kids learning to read beginning at birth. There is a vast literature on normal language development, and I have just put up one link, and we could make that a whole area of study. What should early oral language development look like up and through the preschool years? Oral language is the basis for learning to read, and one of the ways that we get at that is through conversation, reading to your baby, toddler, preschooler, conversation about books, playing with sounds and words. One of the things that you'll hear over and over again is how important phonemic awareness is as a basis for learning to read. And so I put up there a link to a site that the Stern Center has. It's a wonderful webinar on the building blocks for literacy that does a great job of addressing phonemic awareness. Kindergarten. Again, there are so many opportunities for observing where kids are, including some pretty sophisticated neuroimaging research that has been going on. But I linked a particular study that is looking at kindergarten kids, and then they will follow those same kids for several years to determine what about their neurophysiology stays the same or changes as they do or do not become readers. Above and beyond that more sophisticated approach to identifying breakdowns in learning to read, there are many, many, many tools for screening and observation that kindergarten teachers can and do use to pick up on where a child is. One of the links I have up there, and by the way, I should have made this point earlier, those links are for future reference. I'm not expecting anybody to try to click on a link right now because they range from 2 minutes to an hour. But I think these links are really good resources. So kindergarten teachers have good tools that they can use. They start out with a screening report often before a child is even in kindergarten, and the results for all of the districts in the state that administer these tests are online. So you can go and look up the results of the kindergarten screening in your school district. In addition to those pre-kindergarten screenings, kindergarten teachers typically do their own screening, and so have pretty good insight early on, day one, day two, week one, week two of kindergarten, kids that may be somewhat behind. Teachers are kindergarten teachers, but teachers in general, pretty good observers of children. And of course, the more experienced the teacher is, the more background she has for recognizing children who are struggling, even in kindergarten, quotes, before they learn to read. Teachers look at things like their response to books and read-alouds, their response to instruction, what kids are doing when the teacher is trying to show them sounds and letters and the relationship between sounds and letters. And then another tool that the kindergarten teacher has available to her are in-house teacher assistance teams. When it becomes clear that a child is struggling, and that may only become clear when the parents bring things to the teacher's attention, the teacher can ask for a meeting of a teacher assistance team to do a variety of things, including observing and providing some support. In the state of Vermont, when we're not sure if a child is ready to be identified, there's a program which I'm pretty confident most of you are familiar with called the multi-tiered support system that is supposed to provide the kinds of observations and services that children need when they're not yet ready for a formal evaluation. First grade. What do we begin to look at in first grade? I cannot too strongly recommend that teachers and parents get on the same page relative to the Common Core State standards, more particularly the language arts standards, and starting with the foundation standards. I put the link up there with the page number at which to start, Appendix H, page 17. Those standards were, as I understand it, written by Louisa Moats, again, who has an incredibly strong background in early reading skills and dyslexia. I would encourage you not to stop with the foundation standards, though. I think to get a full picture of what is being taught relative to learning to read, you also have to look at the speech and listening standards, you have to look at the reading standards, and you have to look at the writing standards. That's a multi-hour venture, I can assure you. But again, if you're on the same page, if parents and teachers are on the same page, and so when the teacher talks about the standards, the parent knows where the teacher is coming from. And conversely, if the parents come in and say, well, I know that the standards that are appropriate for kindergarten, first grade are, and then list them, then they really have some common language to talk about. The second thing that I think becomes really important in first grade is assessment and beginning to think about time, quality, and importance of assessment. What tools are being used for assessment? And what do we do with the assessment information once we get it? And Brittany talked about this a little earlier, how parents may not come with the technical knowledge about what a test tests or how to interpret the scores. But there's a place where the teacher can really assume her appropriate responsibility for explaining what the test measures and what the scores mean. Thirdly, we're back to the whole idea of progress monitoring and communication. You can start out knowing what a child should be learning by understanding the standards. You can do assessments that tell you where that child is. But unless you do something in the form of progress monitoring and communicating whether or not there are changes in the child's progress, you haven't completed the picture. So again, I'm pushing for progress monitoring as a critical component of making sure that kids get what they need in order to be successful readers. Starting in preschool, we can monitor progress in preschool. We certainly monitor in kindergarten, first and second grade. I'm back to, in a sense, to a summary, both for myself and relative to what Brittany has said about we cannot wait. The consequences of waiting until children fail are so severe that we just can't wait. There are statements all over the place about what are the consequences of kids not being successful readers by third grade. And one of the places that those show up is in the Governor Shumlin's proclamation for Dyslexia Awareness Month. And I mean, he talks about, you know, kids who aren't readers often end up in prison. As well, they end up not being able to get and hold a job. And then, as important, they just don't bring the the good feelings about themselves that give them the confidence to struggle through whatever it is they're working on. So the consequences, I think, are important in terms of what happens if we are not successful in helping kids learn to read relative to their future, but what also happens relative to as they go on in school. If we assume for a moment that the kids are willing to stick with it and they're going to stay in school, by the time they are in a position of not being successful readers by third grade, they have missed a great deal of learning relative to vocabulary, building a knowledge base, and their comprehension skills. We need to do the best we can to get them up to that point and to do all the observations, to do the progress monitoring, to provide whatever support we can. And frankly, I think one of the things that is almost a last resort, the way things are set up now, is to go for a formal evaluation so that kids can get eligible for the services either through 504 or IEPs. I'm not going to talk about that. That's a really deep subject, and so I just put some links that might be helpful. Okay, so let's talk about instruction. The approach the teacher is using to teach reading. In the best of all worlds, parents will know what that is, and the teacher will be good at articulating that, either through a website or a blog or face-to-face. And here's some questions that I think teachers should be able to answer, and I hope they will answer. And if they don't answer them, I hope parents will raise these questions. Is it whole school based? If so, was the teacher involved in the selection? On what basis was the approach chosen? Does the teacher supplement the approach? And again, what changes does the teacher make when a child is struggling? What changes in instruction? What changes in accommodation? And then finally, what role can parents play in supporting classroom-based reading instruction? I think that means that parents have to know what is involved in classroom-based reading instruction, and I think it means that parents have to have an opportunity to participate in whatever way they can. Part of knowing what's going on in classroom is terminology, if you will, speaking the same language. So for parents who aren't used to being in school, they need to learn some of the, quotes, buzzwords that teachers are using. Words like foundation skills, academic vocabulary, information text, complex text, level text, close reading, scaffolding, systematic, explicit, multisensory instruction, formative assessment, zone of proximal development, differentiated instruction, growth mindset. I'm not making those words up out of thin air. Those are the words that you see in the education literature that you read all the time. And I would say that teachers need to be sensitive to whether or not they are using, quotes, teacher language. And parents need to be assertive enough to ask what those words mean, to give an example of those words, and any other words or concepts that the teacher thinks is important. Monitoring progress, understanding instruction. There are 5 aspects to the Common Core State Standards for reading. And I think that one of the things that happens when children struggle early on with reading, all of the emphasis is on phonemic awareness and phonics, and that's appropriate. But we can't forget that reading requires these 5 kinds of skills. So we need to begin to think about what is each of these skills and how is each skill related to every other skill. And I laid this format out just in terms of some sort of simple headings and subheadings. What is it? When is it taught? And how is it taught? And here again is information that I think teachers should be willing and able to share with parents, and parents should ask about and know about. What is phonemic awareness? Words are made up of sounds in its simple definition. When is it taught? It actually is taught from preschool on, and there is lots of expertise out there about the developmental sequence for teaching phonemic awareness. How is it taught? I think you teach it through a whole range, all the way from play to very systematic instruction, depending upon the needs of your child. I then listed some issues and resources, and those hopefully are available both to teachers and parents. I think parents need to know what is being taught in reading, how reading is being taught, but I also think that teachers need to know how parents view the ways in which reading for kids with dyslexia should be taught. So there are just a couple of good sources. This link to Learning Ally is a really excellent, fairly short, like an hour, webinar. Phonics, letters and sounds they make, graphing, phoneme matching, sound-letter relationships, syllable types and patterns, and spelling rules. I'm not going to talk very much about spelling, but I think spelling, frankly, is a big area that hasn't been explored very well, in my humble opinion, in general, and in relationship to the needs of kids who struggle with reading. Typically, the focus on reading is K1 and 2, and I know that fifth graders are still getting spelling homework. I can't say that I know how spelling is being taught, but I think it's an issue we need to pay attention to. For kids who have issues with struggling with reading, and more particularly kids who are dyslexic, the teaching really does need to be systematic, explicit, multisensory, sequential, and intensive. Every once in a while kind of teaching won't work. A little bit of this, a little bit of that won't work. Doing it without kids being partners in knowing what's going on won't work. So it does take a particular kind of instruction for kids who are struggling with phonics. Issues have to do with the training required to do a good job in teaching phonics, the time commitment for both adult and child, whether the adult is the teacher or the parent and the child. And I've put down some sites that I think give some pretty specific and detailed information about a systematic, explicit, multisensory, sequential, intensive approach. Fluency. I consider fluency a real linchpin in this framework for reading. And I don't think I would have said that a few years ago until I was in a situation where I saw that a child's fluency became the focus for whether or not that child was going to get services. And I've begun to think about it along two lines. One is, well, it's pretty easy to tell if somebody can read fluently. And going back to what Brittany said about the particular book that the child is reading, in schools, the notion is that they should be fluent on a book leveled to their reading skill. I think that we need to have a better understanding of what fluency is when kids are not being, quotes, fluent, but more importantly, why they aren't being fluent. And so I want to suggest that we pay more attention to fluency. It's pretty easy as a parent have your child read and have some sense of whether or not he's reading fluently. And that means with inflection and comprehension. In my view, there are also questions around how fluency is taught. And I wanted to put up 4 references that I have found very useful in trying to understand and address this problem. One is a program by Marianne Wolf, again an expert on dyslexia, called RAVO, and there's a link for her. Rosinski, who is another expert on fluency and has done a significant amount of work. There's another site that I think people may not be as familiar with, but I consider to be an excellent resource, and it's called Reading Plus. Their focus is very much on kids becoming successful readers early, and then finally sources that make audiobooks available to parents and children. Vocabulary. One of the things that we know is that one of the best predictors, even early on, of success in school is vocabulary. And we know that much of what kids gain in vocabulary once they start to read is from reading. So vocabulary becomes pretty central both to fluency and to comprehension. And here's just another example where I think we need all of the pieces, all those 5 pieces of reading. I'm just going to mention 4 places or 4 kinds of vocabulary that I think would be helpful to, again, both teachers and parents in understanding children who struggle with reading, children who are dyslexic or have other learning disabilities. The core vocabulary, one of the things that we know is that there's actually a fairly small percentage of words that occur over and over and over again in reading. And I don't remember this statistic, but it may be something like 100 words count for 75% of what someone reads. And again, the text project does a great job on explaining that. Second category are academic words. Words that are used in directions, words that are discipline specific. When your child comes home as a 3rd grader and is studying something in science, it's really important to know what those specific words are. So there's a core of what I'm calling meta words, means words for learning, including direction words and words that are specific to science or math, that kids really need to know. There's a very well-used approach to teaching vocabulary called concept mapping or semantic mapping, and I put that site there. And then the 4th element is morphology. If we really want kids to understand things like syllable rules and meanings of words, then we have to teach them something about morphology. Comprehension, I think as we move into a time where the standards are upping the demand on reading, we're going to find that comprehension gets to be more and more of a challenge. Some of the buzzwords that I mentioned earlier, close reading, complex text, will enter into the issues in teaching reading comprehension skills. And so I think we have to pay attention to, we have to pay as much attention to comprehension as we do to those 4 other skills if we want kids to really be successful readers. And I've just, for future reference, put a couple of links. One that deals with strategy instruction, including some work that I've done on that. Again, the text project, because they've done a tremendous amount of work on comprehension and audiobooks. Finally, last but certainly not least, the learner as the center of attention. What does the learner have to contribute? Everything, including expressing feelings about reading. And whether they're feelings we want to hear about or know about, we need to know how kids feel about reading. We want to know if kids are actively seeking help. And I think they send us signals. They tell us when they're not being successful. Developing an awareness and mastery of reading and learning strategies. We want kids to know that there are such things as strategies and that they can use them. Willingness to try. When kids are reluctant to learn, there's a reason, and we need to understand what it is. And then finally, I would love to see kids be more willing to share about their reading, both what they're reading in, and again, in both literary and information tests, but also what they know about reading and reading instruction and what is most helpful for that instruction. Kids are good observers. They know if they're not doing well, and if we're observant, we can, quotes, hear them or see them. Finally, Brittany and I hope and believe that if we can get teachers and parents on the same page, we can make sure that kids are successful readers well before third grade. Yeah.
Hi, we've had a few questions. The first question is, what advice would you give to a parent of a first grader who feels that their child may be dyslexic, perhaps with family history, and is being told by the school it is too soon to test for SLD and that they cannot diagnose dyslexia at school? So I would absolutely recommend that this parent, you can call the Vermont Family Network, or you can simply write a statement that says that you are requesting a comprehensive evaluation for this child. And the school has to do that, or they have to tell you in writing why they're not. The second question, and so it's not too early to test for an SLD in first grade, and the school is correct. The second question was, and the school cannot diagnose dyslexia at school. That is true. The schools cannot diagnose dyslexia, but the Stern Center can, and independent evaluations can. So the second question is also, what advice would you give a parent who has a child diagnosed with an SLD, but not the exact diagnosis of dyslexia, even though it seems that this is what the child is struggling with? So this is where I would perhaps even have the parent call the Vermont Family Network. And you have to look back in your record and see when your last comprehensive evaluation was. But you can go back and actually say you disagree with that comprehensive evaluation. You kind of, and you can ask for a publicly funded, at the expense of publicly funded evaluation app from the school. Another question, what suggestions do you have for young adults with dyslexia who are no longer in school but are suffering because of their reading challenges? Well, that's a really great question. I'm going to answer part of that and then pass the answer over to Fran. I was recently in a class with, I took an Orton Gillingham training, which is basically like a gold star training for dyslexia. And in there, there was someone from the Vermont adult learners who was taking the course, and actually she needs to do 100 practicum hours with a student. So if you'd like to send me an email, maybe I can hook you up with her, because you can learn these strategies even in adulthood. Thank you for that question. Is it possible to get a printout with all of the links in this webinar? Yes, that's going to be coming up. They're going to be posting it to the Vermont Family Network website by the end of the week, by the beginning of next week, yeah, by the end of this week.
Can I just interrupt for a minute? I haven't asked you this. I'm asking Kathleen. I haven't asked you this, but is there any objection to if somebody sends us an email sending them the PowerPoint?
Oh, and you're welcome to send an email to Fran, and she can send you the, you can see her still up, Toomey and 12 at gmail.com, and she would be glad to send you her the PowerPoint with the links right now. What about late detection, 6th grade? There's still hope.
There's still hope.
There's still a lot of
Absolutely.
hope. There may be more advocating that you may need to do. It's always going to be advocating with all of the parents. I'm sad for you, but I was in the Stern Center sitting there, and I happened to talk to another mom, so you're not alone with that late detection. Her daughter was in the 12th grade, and the first time I met with her, she was getting an evaluation, and she had to come back in the next week, and the mother the first week said, oh, no, this is not dyslexia, and the second week she goes, they're talking about dyslexia, and her eyes were just tearing up because she went through 12 years of school at a very good school in the state of Vermont and was not detected. So you're not alone. How do you suggest a parent describes dyslexia to her child? Did you do that? Yes, I did. And I think what we're going to be Decoding Dyslexia-Vermont. We just got together with 4 different families with dyslexic children, and it was really nice to see the bonding. I think one of the most important pieces is to, we can talk about these, Einstein and these other people and Steve Jobs and these people who are dyslexic in society, but that really didn't mean anything to my 2nd grader or 1st grader. These are these older men, but then like Bella Thorne was dyslexic, and then they had some other people that they knew, and my oldest just spoke in her classroom and said, Mom, I think my friend is dyslexic. I go, how come? She said her dad's dyslexic. I'm like, well, but the awesome part about that conversation was she's speaking about it. I did do that, and I think it's really important for your child to know that they're dyslexic, but there's also some great videos. If you go to our Facebook page on Decoding Dyslexia-VT, there's an Arthur, a little cartoon with a kid who's dyslexic, when one of the little cartoon characters are dyslexic, and it talks about how this guy is really intelligent, he just learns differently, and it's hard for him to learn to read. Okay. What websites are particularly good for parents? I visited the National Center on Learning Disabilities and noticed all the online conversations between parents and experts on real-life challenges. Websites, I would suggest the International Dyslexia Association would be one of the best websites. I think Fran has a few listed.
Yeah, well, Orton Gillingham has its own website.
Okay. We are hoping to create a website. There's another website in
Learning Ally.
Learning Ally has a good website. That's Learning.
Oh, Reading Rockets is a good website. I think I have that link on someplace because they collect resources from every place, and you can practically type in anything at their website, and you can get something up. So Reading Rockets, and I can't remember if I have it on mine. But again, if you want to write to me on email, I will find that particular reference, but maybe a list of other references.
Okay, we have time for a couple more questions. Oh, you're welcome. What advice do you have for parents of students interested in tech programs, but being told that because of the dyslexia, they don't think their child will ever get a job in the trades due to the need to read manuals? Well, first of all, a lot of brilliant trade people are dyslexic, and that is just, I'm really sorry someone said that to you. That's not true at all. So what advice do you have? Well, first, that's not true. Second, if that child is still in school, I would say, okay, well, this child can learn to read with proper intervention, and we need to get that for them immediately. It's really hard for parents to advocate for their needs, and I still, at times, even last year, and
I think it is not inappropriate when you get a statement like that, to ask for the research that supports that statement. I mean, just because you are, quotes, a professional doesn't mean you get to say whatever you want. You need to have backup support for that. And so I would ask for the research base.
Mm-hmm. And I think it was like Thomas Edison. He was told that, he'd never make it, do anything with his life and look what he accomplished. So, yeah, that's the frustrating piece when we hear little news like that. So thank you. You're welcome. Thank you for your time. And read that. Oh. One more question. Finding that teacher. Where you mentioned finding that teacher. Where did you find that teacher? What teacher? Can you be more specific? And this will be the last question. The perfect teacher. Oh, we moved, but I took the Orange Gillingham training, and I'm working on that with my kids. So I think the perfect teacher. Fran?
I think there are lots of, quotes, perfect teachers out there. That doesn't mean that you can find them easily. But remember that teachers sometimes have their own children who struggle with learning, whether it's through dyslexia or some other type of disability.
I think it's important to find a school that will work with your child, though. And I'm not saying I'm the perfect teacher. That's not the case. I'm just adding a little bit more to my kids because I know what to add. I think there's a lot of great teachers out there, and it's about advocating for that right program for your kids, and it's a lot of work. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. This webinar will be archived on Vermont Family Network's website along with many other previously recorded webinars. Be sure to visit Vermont Family Webinars website at www.vermontfamilynetwork.org, all spelled out, for a complete list of upcoming webinars, workshops, and support groups. Have a good day.